What's going on, men of brotherhood? So good to see you guys here. We got a little bonus episode going on here. Good. I'm up here with Britton Bishop, who's our student pastor here at Church on the Move, and we said we were going to do this. We spoke. I interviewed you for our October Brotherhood Breakfast. Your story is incredible. You have like a 2.5, 3 hour podcast already out there from a previous job that you had. I listened to all of it. It was all good. There was no way we could cover all that in 33 minutes or whatever we had. And so much of what we wanted to talk about, we didn't get to talk about. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, let's jump into the podcast studio. Yeah. If you watch any of stuff, this is Whit's podcast studio here that
I was told this is Jamie Joe's podcast studio.
That's right. I'm sure she told you that. But we get to use the studio space. And so just kind of continue the conversation. And it's been a little while. It's been over a month since we did that. And this is kind of the soonest we could coordinate getting in here together. And so I thought, well, how could we kind of frame this up to keep going? One of the things that we didn't get to dive too much into was the impact at certain key inflection points in your life that men had. Yeah. That just kind of were there or showed up or had been faithful and you didn't even realize it, but they were there when you needed them. I want us to get into that. But before we get into that, I just wanted to, what's been going on with you this last month? Do you have a team that you follow that you're enjoying or that's doing poorly?
No, we're locked
talk
in.
A little bit about that for me. What's been going on lately, Britton?
I am a diehard Dan Campbell fan.
Okay.
So Detroit Lions. I guess I root for Dan Campbell though, and so we've just been on the kneecap tour,
dude. Just
every single Sunday biting kneecaps. This Sunday, I'm not going to name any names, but he might be our pastor here named Whit. Came out of the woodwork. Has never texted me once in my life, but the Lions are down at halftime, and all of a sudden Whit has my phone number now, and he's texting me about it. But he was quiet in that second half. When we started coming back.
Keep finding a way.
I'm sorry. I'm saying we. That's like my pet peeve. I'm not a part of the Detroit Lions.
You're not?
No.
You look like you could be.
I look like I could be a part of their cafeteria staff. But yeah, I mean, it's been fun. NFL's crazy. The Chiefs are, I think they've sold.
Well, I'm a Broncos fan.
Yeah, that's tough.
So close.
Yeah.
So close.
I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but I'm not going to say they're not worshiping an outer being that's helping them block these field goals. Did you see
the Broncos line guy that just fell over backwards?
It's like a soccer player.
What happened? Hey. Hey, hold on a second. Let's get to the content.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. It was bad. I didn't dog on soccer. I was just giving an example of what he looked like.
Yes, exactly.
But, yeah, it's been crazy. The Bo Nix is actually pretty good.
He's doing really well.
I think maybe the Sean Payton connection there. They were getting after it, yelling at each other at the beginning. But that's what I think all good manly relationships require that type of feedback.
I agree. Yeah. You got to care enough to get a little upset every now and
100%.
then. So cool. Well, we don't want this to be a long podcast, but just to kind of recap a little bit, the things that I think stood out so much about your story, Britton, were just the fact that I think you've had a journey that maybe a lot of guys that are watching this could relate to, where there have been times that you felt yourself drawing closer to God, and then there were even back to when you were a junior high kid, and there have been times that you really did your own thing and kind of wandered away. And this is the model that we have in Scripture of the people of Israel. It's like when they needed God, they seemed to draw near to him. And then when things were going pretty good or they wanted something else, they would drift away. And I think all of us have done that in our lives. But something that seemed to pop up in your story a lot was that when you were going through those ups and downs, God had this way of putting men in your life that were what you needed when you needed it. Yeah. And so what I want us to talk a little bit about is, first of all, those men and kind of what was going on in your life, but also what I want guys watching this to do is to go, okay, where am I needing to notice the men in my life that I can lean on, that can help me? Yeah. And I think a part of maturing in Christ is, when do we start going, where are the men in our lives that need us?
Yeah.
Maybe they're younger, but they don't always have to be younger. Where are there men that we need to come alongside and encourage when they need encouragement? Call out when they need to be called out.
For sure.
And so I think we can see that a little bit through this conversation about guys in your life. And I don't know where you want to start, but I was just thinking about when you were in junior high, and this guy Les, right?
Yeah.
Kind of showed up, and what was going on in your life, and what was the role that he played?
Yeah, so at that time in my life, we had just moved. My mom had just married my stepdad, and we moved from Verdigris to Ulaga, and I was just kind of like in this weird middle school, finding new friends, all the weird things that happen in middle school, right? Discovering things on the internet that I didn't know existed. New dad on the scene. Like, is this guy, do I have to listen to this guy?
Yeah.
Like, he teaches me to hunt, though, so that's kind of cool. Like, all these weird things. Yeah. And Les was the youth pastor at this little church in Ulaga, Oklahoma called Harbor Church, still there, still rocking. One of the best church coffee shops I've ever been to, too.
Oh,
In
wow.
Ulaga, Oklahoma, it'll change your life on your way to Rocker W. No free shout-outs.
Good to remember.
Yeah. But I remember going to church. My friend invited me to church, and there was just this guy there named Les. And I had no, like, concept of what a youth pastor was. I thought it was kind of weird that this guy was just hanging out with us. This was back in the day when you didn't need volunteers, really, right? It was just this dude hanging out with all of us, but he was always around. Like, he would be at sporting events, he'd be at basketball games, he'd be at the school for lunch. Like, just Les was always around. And I remember the year it went on, and then this thing came up called False Creek. And I still have the Facebook message on my phone, actually, and I was invited to False Creek, and I made the excuse that my family couldn't afford it, because I think times were tight. They probably would have figured it out, but I messaged him like, hey, can't come, like, just trying to get out of it because I didn't want to go. And he messaged me back, and he said, don't worry about the money. We got you covered. And I went on this False Creek experience. That's where I shared my story a little bit in 8th grade. Kind of had my first experience with Jesus, like Jesus moment, gave my life to Christ. Prayed a prayer, got baptized, all this stuff just kind of happened. And but there was just this consistency in Les. And 9th grade, I'd forgotten about Les. Maybe even by the end of that summer, I'd forgotten that Les existed. But it wasn't until years later when I realized, like, that consistency formed and shaped me as a youth pastor. That's why I stood in the rain to watch Lincoln beat Ida Bell by like 40. Me and PG are out there freezing, soaking wet, and it's like, why are we here? We have YouTube. Like, why would I come stand on this sideline? And it boils down to because Les did. Wow. Right? Like, why do I go to junior high basketball game? Why am I going to dance recitals? Like, and it literally, I think, like, it could border down to, it's a part of the job, but I could get away with it not be. And I don't think people would really, I'm good enough at other things, but it boils down to, that's what Les did. Wow. And that's what impacted me.
Yes.
I remember him being there. I remember the presence on the sidelines after a game, him coming up, remembering my name, giving me a fist bump, telling me that I smoked that dude or whatever. Like, I remember that. And there was just something about that formed and shaped me. He was the first dude that ever talked to me about, like, sexual sin. It was a weird time in life, but he was, like, unwavering and unashamed of who Christ had called him to be. And he was the first youth pastor, now that I can remember, that I was like, oh, being a youth pastor is actually pretty cool.
Wow.
All the other guys were like cornballs, like flip-flops with their jeans. No offense if you wear jeans and flip-flops, but that's just, I'm out on it. But yeah, like, and Les was like, oh, this guy's super consistent. He's authentic. He's genuine. He has a wife and a daughter. They're awesome. Like, he loves us. Yeah. But yeah, I think that was kind of a formational that started in 8th grade. Like I said, 9th grade, forgot Les existed. Yeah. And it wasn't until years later when I got invited back to go be a part of that False Creek camp as a speaker for a church and all kinds of stuff that I, like, remember I was driving. I was like, man, what was the first time I came to False Creek? I was like, oh, I bet I had, and I, like, scrolled back and I had that DM message between Les and I. And so it's just really, cool. I think he still lives in Sulphur or something. He's like a children's pastor. He's a legend. He's awesome. Just wholly committed to doing what God's called him to. So.
Man, a couple of things that jump out to me in that story is, one, this is kind of a churchy term, so forgive me, but what we might say in the church, like the ministry of presence. Yeah. That's kind of a churchy term, but it's simple. I'm not saying that it's easy, because it's not easy to stand out in the rain at a football game just because you want to demonstrate the love that you have for those young people. But it is simple. Anybody can do it. Yeah. And I hope that guys listen to this have like a memory of a Les type person in their life. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was somebody from the church. Maybe, and I know you could say this too. Maybe it's your dad, stepdad, whatever, but just a person that was consistent.
Yeah.
There's a huge value in that. Let me go on a rabbit trail for just a second.
Absolutely.
I've been thinking about identity as sonship a lot lately, just as I've been talking to guys. Like, I find that at the core of a lot of their problems, like we can start diagnosing problems and why their marriage is going off the rails or why they're addicted to something. But I find so many of these come back to this inability to have an identity that's located in true sonship. And you can understand why, because a lot of young men grow up either without a dad or maybe their dad didn't know how to be a good dad. He was doing his best. And so what we start doing, and you talked about this a lot at the breakfast, and I think everybody related to this, we start trying to create our own identity.
Yeah.
It's usually through performance of some kind, whether it's how smart we are, athletic we are, good we are with women, all that stuff. We start building our own identity, and we rush off into that and not realize that like our true identity is the name that we bear. I mean, we know this is true. Like even we carry our father's name.
Yeah.
We are in the line of our grandfather and our father. Like we carry this on, and we get to, do we make that name better, or do we continue if there's been certain levels of brokenness? Do we just continue that cycle? And so we understand that from like a worldly perspective. I am a Martin. You are a Bishop. You know, and so, but I think from a spiritual perspective, God in the same way wants us to bear his name as an heir, and he sent Christ to accomplish that,
and I think
offer it for us
100%. And what I see there too is like God doesn't just tell us what to do; He showed it. Like Jesus came as an example. Like He didn't come down as like the Father, right? He came down as a son, submitted to the Father, being led and taught, and all of these things. And I think often that sometimes for men, like we have a bad childhood experience, or we don't have a good growing up as a son, and we immediately jump to, well, then I'm going to be the best father I could possibly be. But I think the key, what we can see in Scripture, is the best fathers are good sons. And so like the way that we can do that is to figure out, man, how can I be poured into before I'm able to pour out? And that's what, just
no, said. That's good. And the reason that I'm going there with this, and I would say I love that statement. I've often said the best leaders know how to be good followers, especially in the kingdom of God.
100%.
Like if you're a good follower of Christ, you become a great leader. And so, but where am I going with this is that I think we have these opportunities as men. I don't care how old you are, really. Maybe not so much when you're teenage or younger, but young adults, middle-aged men, older men, we have this opportunity to make little deposits that I think help young men with the spirit of sonship, with the identity of sonship. And just having a man like that you respected, to a certain level. I don't know what you said. Like later on, you kind of forgot about him, but you look back on that time. This was a man that had a good reputation, that noticed you. And it wasn't that your dad or your stepdad were failing at this, but it was just other people dripping in. I see you as a son with all the potential of a son to become the man that you were created to be. And so I think we underestimate what those little things, just being present, just the fist bump, just the I saw you run over that kid. It's the things that a father says to his son, and we have an opportunity to do that. I would say to the guys listening, be thankful for the men that you had in your life that did that, and look for opportunities to do that, whether it's your biological son, whether it's a nephew, whether it's young men in church, guys you work with. If we can help with sonship, I think that is our most core identity. Oh yeah, and I think for men, we overcomplicate it, right? It's like kind of we get stuck in this like paralysis of analysis. Like, well, what will it look like for me to pour into this guy? How could I? What will I say? Like, and like you just hinted to it, is like, no, you just give him a fist bump. You tell him, hey, I see you. Have a normal conversation. Be a normal dude. And treat them like a normal dude, and show them that you don't have to be this cornball, weird, always have a pithy one-liner, like C.S. Lewis quote for this kid every time he does something. Like no, you're the guy nobody wants to be around. But the fist bump and the, hey, I see you. That was cool right there. You did or a calling out of, hey, man, I think you could do better. I think what you did right there was, I think there's more in you. And I heard Jordan Peterson say this. I hope that I can get it right, but he's like, the spirit of a mother is to love you exactly the way you are. The spirit of a father is to love you for what you can become. Now, I know that's a little too narrow because moms and dads can do both.
Right.
But I liked what he was saying is that the wonderful thing about the nurturing of a mother is that she picks you up with your skinned knee.
Yeah.
And she sees all the good in you that's now. And the really beautiful thing about a dad is a dad loves you for who you are now, but he wants to love you to who you are not yet.
Yeah.
And moms can do that too.
Right.
But I thought that was so good. And I think we could do that in the lives of men around us. And we often underestimate our influence. We think, oh, what that guy's not going to listen to me.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you can call out good, like you said, hey, great job, or I see something in you that you haven't yet realized. You've got what it takes if you push yourself. Man, men are hungry for that. All over, of all ages, are hungry for that. Anyway, I love this conversation.
So
this is good, but I want to keep going because one of the guys that you did get to talk about at the breakfast was Dr. B.
Oh, yeah, Dr. B.
And I know you shared some of that story, but just real quickly recap it because, man, you were a young stud at that time. Like you were a recruited football.
Yeah, for sure young.
Well, I mean, you got recruited to play football for a reason. And
Yeah.
I know there's the injuries that happened, but when you met Dr. B, like you were becoming big man on campus.
Yeah, I thought I was.
And so talk a little bit about that relationship with Dr. B.
Yeah, Dr. B was just, he was our team chaplain. And so for me, when I showed up at college, we started summer workouts, all this stuff. And so you're just lifting weights, just all the things that happen in a weight room, right? Just trying to be strong, trying to show you belong. It's just go to the gorilla exhibit at the zoo. It's pretty much the same thing. But we were just like, it was just a bunch of jockeying for I belong here. Aren't you glad I'm here? Look how big I am. Look how tough I am. Side note, first ever workout I did in college, I threw up pink pre-workout in front of the whole women's basketball team. So that was a good start to my career there. Yeah. But yeah, so we're just doing all that stuff. And every Thursday was like big conditioning day. We would run every day, but Thursday was lighter lift, and then we're going to go run. And this dude showed up the first time. And I remember we're out there. I mean, and I'm a big dude, so running just makes you mad. And so the people who encourage, like, don't clap for the guy that's coming in last. It sucks being in last, and you clap. Don't patronize me, all right? But anyways, Dr. B was out there, and I remember he was like encouraging, but smoking everyone. Like receivers and DBs and the distance stuff can't keep up with this. Like, he's just a beast. I'm like, who is this random bald old dude out here that's just crushing? And then afterwards, we go over to his car, and he opens up the back, and there's just this huge cooler full of Gatorade. And he's like, "What's up, man? What's your name?" Get to know him. I'm Dr. B, and that's all he said. I was like, "Oh, cool, sweet. See you later." The next Thursday is there, and it just continues. And then school starts, the summer's over with, and they did their big ministry year kickoff for that ministry. Gave us all T-shirts that said Encounter Football. He was good at what he did. And just the rubber bracelets. We had a ton of identity in him being our chaplain, but he was just cool. And I didn't like what he was like. I would go to chapel because the food was different than team breakfast, so I was like, I'll go get some extra donuts or something. But he was just a consistent guy. Gave me a job at the wellness center, which was our gym on campus, which was just an easy cush. Go sit behind the desk, wipe off a treadmill every now and then, get to flirt with the girls that are coming in to work out. That was kind of the whole gig. And he was just a consistent, steady presence. And he was, everybody knew who he was, but he wasn't hyper spiritual. He talked a lot of crap, which I loved. And you've now learned that's part of my love language. But there's just, and it was just like that. And I remember when crap kind of hit the fan, and I kind of came to the end of myself, that he was a presence in that too. And I'll never forget, I don't remember if it was sitting in his basement. Obviously I've forgotten. It was either in his basement or in his office. And we're just talking through all this stuff that's going on in my life and everything. This is post praying the prayer, and he said, "Britton, I saw something in you that I couldn't let go to waste." Because I remember asking him, I was like, "Why me? What was?" And it was just, I saw something in you that I couldn't let go to waste.
Wow. But
he wasn't annoying about it. He called me out, and he would schedule me for the early shifts for the wellness center, even though he knew I'd probably be hungover and all that stuff. But I went to church because there was free food. He let me be a part of stuff I probably shouldn't have been. but just over time. And then when I was in on the Christianity stuff, it was like, here's the keys to the family van, just go for it. And that was a mistake in itself. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was just, I see this in you, and it's easier to calm down a hot fire than build a fire with wet wood. So he was just like, I'm just gonna douse. He was awesome, and he was consistent, and that was a big part of that.
One thing that jumps out to me when you talk about Dr. B, and I've heard you talk about him a couple of times, that I think it'd be good for us to shine a light on, and that was, he was pretty patient.
Oh yeah,
meaning he wasn't aggressively trying to get you to turn your life over to Jesus. He was playing a long game, it seemed like, with you. He was giving you jobs. He was doing subtle things like having you work early because he knew you were out drinking and stuff but he wasn't. I just think there's a lot to be learned from that. I think we can get, especially when we're on fire for Jesus and maybe we're new in our faith and we're just we're trying to get everybody over the finish line of faith. But it sounded like he was this consistent. You knew exactly where he stood in his relationship with Jesus, but he wasn't guilting you. He wasn't manipulating you. He was playing a long game. And when you would ask him a question like, why me? He'd give you a profound answer. Yeah. I see something in you that you don't even see in yourself.
Yeah. That was a 3-year process. But I think what I learned from him, and I've since talked to him about this, is he said, I trust God enough to know he's not done with you yet. And so, because I was always, there's we're just 100+ dudes on this football team that he's chaplain to. Plus, volleyball, basketball, wrestling, baseball. So he's the chaplain of all of these sports at this college. Wow. And so he's always around all this. He's got other associate chaplains that are helping him with stuff. But he's not, it wasn't like he was showing up to the locker room with gospel tracts and all this stuff. It was he knew he was serving a God that finished, he knew God was better than his ability to be a good converter in the locker room. And that's obviously there's time and a place for you to preach the gospel and stuff like that, but he was keenly in tune with the Spirit's prompting in his life, and that's what I appreciated most about him.
Man, that's amazing.
And he was a man of prayer.
And maybe we were going to get to this at the end, but I'm just gonna bring it into the middle here. When we first talked about doing the breakfast, a compelling idea that you said that I liked is that you can kind of look back and count on your fingers these men. Les,
Dr.
B. We're going to cover a couple of others, but I thought I can do the same thing. Dean Troon, Bruce Wisenhunt, these guys that immediately come to my mind right now. Dave Jewett is that in my life,
legend.
It's these, and I think a good goal for us as followers of Jesus, men, is that what would it look like to be one of the fingers on a man's life that says, man, that guy, I don't think any of this is they had all the answers. No. It wasn't that. It was they were willing essentially to sacrifice their own time and their own stuff to invest into me. Yeah. And man, that's all of us have been impacted by men like that. For sure. All of us must become men like that. Yeah. So anyway, I just think that's cool. Let's keep moving though, because what we didn't really get to talk about past Dr. B was a guy named Trey. Yeah. What was going on with Trey? Yeah.
So Trey was he was the youth pastor at the church that I'd given my life to Christ at. He was the first dude to invite me into community, post kind of giving my life to Christ, what I would consider for the sake of Church of the Move, my real Jesus moment. Okay. Post my real Jesus moment, Trey is a figurehead for what has happened formationally in me since then. Trey is an awesome dude. He's a pastor at Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. But him and I were at this. He played football at Hayes, single mom, just this everything about him I related to. And I remember the first time he invited me over, he said, "Hey man, do you want to come watch Monday Night Football at my house?" I'm like, shoot, yeah, I want to come watch Monday Night Football at your house. So I go over to his house and I get there, and I didn't realize at the time that he worked for the church. Okay. So I get there and the worship pastor and his wife are there. All these staff members are there. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Yeah. They made chili, but I think it was vegan. I was kind of mad. What is this cult I'm joining here? But no, I got there and they all were followers of Jesus. but acted like followers of Jesus. Like they were different than any other Christians I'd ever met up to this point.
In what way?
Just in the sense of, I think for me for so long, growing up in the Bible Belt, Ulaga, Oklahoma, there were just so many people, and I know there were good ones too, but you just remember the bad ones because that's just your story. But like, there were so many people that said they loved Jesus, that went to church, that were Christians, that were doing the same things I was, that were thinking the same way I was, that were participating in the same sin that I was. They were just busy on Sundays, and I wasn't. And so I just had no appeal to go be a part of this thing. And so for me, when I met them, it was like, no, they're different. Like they're completely different than I am. They have joy I can't explain, peace I could never understand, like a hopefulness for what is to be and to come of their life, like just this ambition that comes from knowing they're a part of something bigger than themselves, like just all of these things that I'm experiencing around these people, and I'm like, well, I want to be a part of this. Like this is serious. And so just started getting to know Trey, and he started pouring into me, but him and I had such like an informal discipleship process. It wasn't like, let's meet every week. It was just, I was at his house all the time. I ended up moving in next door to him, and I was an idiot. Like some things still will never change. Like you can ask my wife, I'm still kind of dumb when it comes to just general. I think I'm funny. I do dumb things, and it's just how and Trey had to deal with that at that time. Like throwing a Bluetooth speaker, because it was like trap house is what I would call it. The ceiling tiles, you could lift them out and crawl into the other units. And so we would like throw stuff down, like Bluetooth speakers where you knew their bed was, and play stuff in the middle of the night. You name it. Like I could mess with him while he was on the toilet. Just stupid crap. And this dude's trying to really figure his life out. I mean, he's serious now. He's got a real big boy job, and I'm just this college kid but at one point, and all this, Trey's discipling me. I'm growing. He's challenging me, all this stuff. It's the first person to ever tell me that my life isn't about me anymore. Like just very forward. And how he talked to me, very honest. But I remember I was last semester of college, had to do like a 12-hour internship to graduate. And Trey said, hey, I know you've got this internship coming up. I know you've got some really cool opportunities in my major that I had from professional sports teams that I had potential to go work with and all this stuff. Not as an athlete, as a front office laundry boy. But he was like, I want you to consider doing an internship at the church. And I was like, that's a thing? And he's like, yeah, I just want you to think about it. I was like, okay. So we start thinking about it, talking through it, unpaid, all the typical internship at a church things. And I was like, well, we got to get it cleared by my department first. So we take this tour. We created this job description that was like leading games, because maybe that'll work for my mate. Just like completely lied on this whole thing of what I was going to be doing. But it worked. And shrewd as snakes. I think it's in the Bible, right? And so
innocent as doves, and shrewd as serpents.
And so she approves this, and she looked at me and she said, "I think you're making the biggest mistake of your whole entire life."
That,
And I was like, "Okay." So you're cool with it? And she's like, "Yeah." So we sent it, and I was an intern at this church for a semester, and Trey went out of town one time and left me in charge 2 weeks into this thing. I think these kids had Bibles that were older than I had been a Christian. He's like, hey, you're preaching. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, man, I want you to preach.
And you tried to get out of it, right?
Oh, I tried everything. I was like, Trey, I can't do this. I started prepping the content. The sermon series was Real Disciples or something like that. And the sermon title I had was The Pretenders. And I was like, that's me. I can't talk. I am a pretender.
Right.
And, but yeah, he's like, no, you're doing it. And I remember when I preached that first message, there was just this aha moment of this is all I want to do the rest of my life. Yeah. This is it. It's just one of those, I imagine, I actually don't, but for an electrician or a heating and air guy, there's just, you find the thing you're good at. You just, it was my thing. That was my craft. I could never build a house, but I can craft a sermon. And I love telling stories and all this stuff that for my whole life I'd been doing, sitting in the locker room, screwing around like we are right now, all that. So I'm like, oh, you can make a career out of talking to people and knowing Jesus and articulate. At this time, it was just talking to people. I didn't know that there was anything about knowing Jesus and preaching. I thought it was just building a riveting talk that would provoke action. And that came later. And I promise I've developed in that way for the parents listening to this. But and then just through that began this journey of doing ministry. And in the midst of that even had to shift gears because I was doing ministry.
Well, I don't want to chase this rabbit too far, but you did say that it's easy, and I've had this same experience. It's easy to take that same performance-based acceptance and put it on godly things. To say, I mean, you said a few things in the breakfast that I thought were deeply profound about saying if I was a good football player, then they'd have to love me.
Right.
And you even talked about your relation with the Lord. And you said if I'm obedient, then He's obligated to love me.
My obedience equals God's obligation.
That's right. That's the way you said it. And I think even in ministry, even when your motives are good to a certain level, the enemy can still come in and 100%. Go, you better give a good talk if you want people to think that you're a good dude or they'll accept you. And so I just thought, for those of you who are listening, and you and I both do this full time now, and we face the same challenge of whenever I get up there on the stage, especially the weekends I preach, it's just like, it's hard for me not to think about, are people going to think I'm an idiot? Are people going to think I'm cool? Are people going to think that I'm a really sharp communicator? Yeah. Like, it's so hard for those things not to creep in.
It's easy to say that you can mature past those things, but I think you're not very self-aware if you think you can. Yeah. In my opinion. Yeah. I'm sure Whit has but he even talks about and is what I'm doing, does this actually matter?
Right.
And not to tell history, but I mean, he's shared, but I think there's so many sooner or later I'll grow out of this performance-based acceptance. Nope.
Why do you think that is? Because I think I have an idea.
Okay. Of why we can't grow out of it?
Yeah. Why do we always struggle with that?
I think it boils down to it's fear.
It is
at the end of the day. I think whenever you really boil all of the emotion that's into it, it boils down to fear of, do they want me? Do I belong?
Yes.
Did God really?
Did he make a mistake?
Yeah. And so there's all of that. And I think that a majority of the actions we decide to do as men usually are the negative ones, are invoked mostly by fear if we were to really trace those emotions back even further.
And there's not a one of us that want to be known as fearful men.
Right.
It's one of the worst things. That's if somebody asked me, well, you're a fearful person, I'd be like, no, I'm not, because I don't think of myself as a fearful person. And yet fear creeps in very subtle ways that we just don't want to face. Yeah. And it is the thing that God says over and over and over, more so than any other command in Scripture, do not be afraid. Yeah. Do not be afraid. Why? Why does he have to say it so much? Because it's where we struggle.
What would you say, as men, in your interactions with men, where that fear creeps in? What are some of the tells that maybe for a dude that hasn't gotten to the place of, I'm afraid of this, what are some other actions or emotions they might be experiencing that could be, hey, there's probably something you're actually not dealing with deeper down?
Overcompensation is a big one. Where have you ever been around a guy that is really eager to tell you all the things that he's accomplished? Yeah. Because it's an insecurity that says, I don't know that if I don't tell you this, that you'll think that I'm anything. So if I tell you this stuff that I've done, and often it's things that they've really done. Yeah. But if there's an overcompensation to say, I've been there, I've done that, or anybody that one-ups your story. Yeah. Some of this is immaturity, but I do think it comes from a place of, I'm afraid that people will think that I'm a nothing, but I'm a something. Yeah. But who are you trying to convince? Usually yourself. Yeah. I think that's a big one. I think defensiveness comes up. When I counsel with couples that are going through marital stuff, it's always a really bad red flag if everything that she says, he goes, yeah, but this. Yeah, but it's because you did this.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, this I know I'm not perfect, but I only did it because, and I think we convince ourselves that we're not making excuses. We're just giving explanations. But we've got to be honest with that. I think that comes from a place of fear. And then I think the other one that I notice is people who are men who are running toward relief. Yeah. That can take the form of porn. It can take the form of alcoholism. It can take the form of getting your golf handicap down really, really low. It can take the form of 6 fantasy football leagues. It's and you're running from what you're afraid of. What's that?
3 fantasy.
3's okay for you, okay, but as long as hope keeps beating you. But I just think those are some things that, if you're self-aware enough, and I think it should be the goal of every man to know thyself. Yeah. And if you have the ability to step back just a little bit and go, why am I being so defensive? Why am I so angry? What am I trying to prove? Yeah. These are usually indicators that God wants to do a work inside of you for freedom. Yeah. I think freedom, we talk a lot about healing in the church. I wish we talked more about freedom in the church, because I think that's what most men want, is just the ability to be comfortable in their own skin. This is the sonship thing.
Yeah.
It's like, if my identity is as a son and my father has already affirmed who I am, then I can live my life. I can have successes and failures, but my identity is established in sonship. And I think if you're watching this and you're going, man, I demonstrate some of that stuff. I am drinking too much after work every night, and I don't even know why. It could be that you're having an identity and sonship crisis.
Yeah.
So those are just some things that kind of come to my mind.
No, and where you talk about the maturity aspect, this is where another father figure made an impact in my life, because I wasn't aware enough to see those three things in me, right? I was so overcompensating everything, right? Here's my accomplishments. Here's how much I can know about the Bible. I was very I was seeking relief, whether it be through good jobs, through pornography, through substances, all of these different things. And there was a middle one in there as well. There was the
overcompensation, defensiveness,
and I was super defensive. I remember this is the fourth guy, Paul. This is where he came to play. There was a guy that I'd met, and his name was Charlie. Charlie was an incredible missionary, still is, just doing some incredible stuff in the 1040 window for the kingdom. Yeah. And I met this guy, and we'd interacted, and he challenged me in ways I'd never been challenged before. And there was something about him that drove me insane. I could not stand being around this guy. And he would ask me questions that I didn't know the answer to. He would put me in situations that I didn't have the ability to find my way out of this. And finally, during this kind of summer program, I'd asked for a one-on-one meeting with this guy named Paul. So Paul and I, we go and sit down, and he said, "What's going on, man?" And I said, "I'm so tired of this." I said, "I read my Bible more than anybody else. I want to do all these things. I'll serve hard. I can do all of these. I'm into this, and I can't figure it out." And he said, "Britton, it's time you stop doing for Jesus and start doing with Jesus."
It's big.
And we were in a Chick-fil-A for 6 hours, and there's no telling how many chicken strips I ate. Because if you're a man, you eat chicken strips. Nuggets are for women and children. All right, so Scott Miner, I hope you heard that. Yeah, it's just more bang for your buck.
That's right.
There's a weight thing there, but we're sitting there, and he's like, "Man, it's time you start doing with Jesus," and it changed everything. That's like an Ebenezer, build the rock pillar, formational, changed my life moment. Wow. Was in this Chick-fil-A in Denver, Colorado, 19 chicken strips deep, and this dude said, "No, you don't have to just do life for Jesus. You can do it with him and become like him." And that's what drove me nuts about Charlie, is he was like Jesus. Yeah. And I couldn't figure it out because we were doing the same stuff, but something was different about him than me. And that changed everything. Just the way I read my Bible, this sanctification journey began moving out of this. It's just,
what does that even mean? What is
right?
Some guys watching this well, I don't know what that word means.
Right. Yeah.
What is
sanctification? Sanctification to me, I think often there are two aspects to salvation. I think there's salvation the moment you give your life to Jesus, and there's this sanctification process that is this kind of long obedience in the same direction, this long becoming like Jesus. It's just consistency over time, and it's through trials that you become more like Jesus. It's through just your everyday circumstances, and often we find people that have prayed the prayer 14, 15 times, and they're like, man, and it's like, I don't know if this is a salvation issue in your life or if Jesus is trying to sanctify you. So it's just like a becoming more like Jesus. I think James 1 gives a good articulation to what sanctification is. And consider it pure joy when you face trials of various kinds, because they're producing something in you. Romans 5 talks about rejoicing in our endurance, because that endurance produces faith, and that faith produces hope, and that hope won't disappoint. First Peter talks about, don't be surprised when you face these fiery trials, but instead rejoice because you're becoming more like Jesus. So that would be the way I would articulate sanctification. These things in your life, these situations, these circumstances, these choices that you're making that are forming you to be more like Jesus. They're not necessarily salvation things. It's not you giving your life to Christ again, but it's you putting another line in the sand of saying, I'm becoming more like Jesus in this space in my life. So for me, that's what I needed from Paul, as I needed somebody to tell me that it wasn't I hadn't arrived yet, right? Salvation wasn't the end of the game. It was the beginning of the game. And there was way more involved in this becoming like Jesus. And so for me, like reading my Bible, it was a lot less about getting it done. And it was a lot more about what does it want to say to me today, right? It was learning how to meditate on Scripture, not just a chapter a day to keep the devil away or whatever people say. Like it was, what is prayer? It's not just a time for me to go and tell God all the things I need, but it's a space where I can praise Him. I can admit things. I can make requests. I can give thanksgiving. I can sit in silence. I can shut up for a minute. Like that's sanctification. It's learning how to serve other people in a way that isn't to gratify self, but it's to give away of myself. It's to understand that when I walk into these hard moments, when my wife and I get the diagnosis that we weren't looking forward to, all of those are places and spaces where God wants to sanctify us. It's situations that maybe necessarily He didn't cause to happen, but He's going to use them to produce something in you. And so that's what Paul really began just teaching. I just talked to him yesterday on the phone. Just there's stuff going on still. Like you think you'd arrive sooner or later, right? And I'm talking to him and he's like, man, can you imagine what God wants to do with this? Yeah. And that sucks to hear. And He knows when to say it and when not to say it. Yesterday I needed to hear it, but that's that sanctification journey is when everything changed for me. That's the version of Britton that Church on the Move gets to experience. There's a version of me out there in ministry that's the most toxic person you could ever be around. And it was the performance-based, gotta do. And it was in the midst of kind of post-COVID, things weren't working the way I wanted them to. I just couldn't figure it all out. And this is just you get unhealthy sometimes. You know, stuff happens in your life. You lose sight of it. It's that 1 degree. You get 1 degree off, and then all of a sudden you're way down the road, and you're like, how the heck did I get all the way over here? I think that's a mountain thing, I think, right? Yeah, that's true. There you go. See you on the golf course.
You have to reorient regularly to make sure you're not just continuing to go just 1 degree off, because you do that for a few miles, you're a long way from where you want to be. So you recalibrate. And what's great is I don't know, maybe it was Francis Chan said this, talking about like when the GPS stuff first came out in your car. And you'd make a wrong turn, and she would just real politely say, recalibrating or redirecting, you know. And like God has put this spirit inside of us that is not a spirit of condemnation, but we're meant to listen when it says time to recalibrate. You're off course and get back on course. And I know we're about out of time. I mean, I would just want to look into the camera right now and say that a most sincere appreciation and thank you to Les and to Dr. B and to Trey and to Paul for this, what probably seemed like very small steps to you in Britton's life that we get to benefit, because those men had this, they were a part of your journey with Jesus that have brought you here, and now you're helping our sons and daughters in similar ways and in other ways that God has led you to do. When I went back and listened to the breakfast again, and by the way, if you don't know, our breakfasts are the video of the breakfast now for the last couple of years. You can get it on YouTube and hear it on our podcast. But the best part of that was whenever you kind of got at the end and I just kind of said, what do you want to say? You went off on just like our young people need men who are real men. And so some of it can just be recap, but I just want to give you kind of the final word. I hope that you've been able to glean from this, if you're watching, glean kind of a lot of different principles, but to just kind of go back to where we started. We need men in our lives that will pour into us. It doesn't have to be like an older mentor. I think that's beneficial, but it might just be brothers. We need men that will encourage us. We need men that will hold us accountable. We need men that, and the only way you're going to find that is to put yourself in places where you're around good men.
100%.
And so we have good opportunities for that between the breakfast and mid-sized groups and small groups and mountain men and all these different things that you can get plugged into. But I also think one of the best things we can do on our sanctification journey is to stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about others. And you hit on that some at the breakfast, just like I ask you, I think the question is, what can we do as men to help the next generation of young men who are facing some pretty extreme challenges? Every guy my age goes, if I would have had a phone in my pocket that could access any porn at any time, I mean, I was having to dig through the dumpster to find a penthouse, you know, like, I don't know where I'd be. I would have I would have shipwrecked my life. But our sons are dealing with that all the time. They have to have a whole different set of parameters and tools to resist temptation that I didn't have to have. So that's kind of what I set you up. And I just want to give you the last word, Britton. There's a lot of guys, young and old, listen to this. What else? What more can we do? What would you say to those men? And like I said, it can be a little bit about what you said, but just what does it look like to be a real man that in such a way that helps the next generation?
Yeah, I think just the biggest thing, and I hit on this at the breakfast, is the young men of this next generation need men to look to that are acting like men, that are living a life that is worthy of the cause of Christ, that we're done playing church, that we're not just simply checking a religious box, but that we're becoming like Jesus in everything that we do. Your children need to see you love their mom in a way that's sacrificial, like Christ loved the church, that's giving of himself, that's saying, I had a hard day at work, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to love my family more than I worked at work today. It's just all of those things, and I think within all of that, we need to know that there are young men out there that are hungry for more. Yeah. It's not just this consumeristic generation that's sitting waiting for a handout, but no, there are young men out there that are ready to pull themselves up by their boot. We just had a young dude in our offices today that is chasing after Jesus with everything he has, that wants more of Jesus, more of his presence in his life, more of his impact. He wants to continue living out his passions and his purposes in a way that glorifies and honors Jesus, and that comes from men coming alongside those guys and investing into them, giving of themselves, sacrificing of yourself, looking at your calendar and saying, what can I give away today? And that might mean you have to sacrifice another space in your life that is seemingly important. For some, it's fathers realigning their kids' schedules for them. Travel baseball is awesome. Your kid's probably not going to play after high school. And so how are you aligning their life in a way that they're becoming more like Jesus? Because you're still in charge. You're the dad. You get to tell your kid to go to church even if they don't want to. And I know that's not popular, but you get to make those decisions. But the more you become like Jesus, the more that your kid sees the church impacting you, the more they're going to want to be around it. And so I think those are the key aspects. But where can you give your life away? Can you serve? I mean, could you imagine if Kids on the Move was just saturated with men wanting to serve, what the state of that church could be? Yeah. What 180 student ministries could be if men were the ones in there. We need more Chris Stubbs. We need more Jaime Torres. We need more Ephraim. We need more Jeremy Dion. We need more men that are successful in this world, that have careers, that are saying, you know what, I'm sacrificing on myself. We need more Jesus Ramirez. We need these men that are saying, you know what, I'm giving everything I am to this cause, no matter the cost. I don't care what it costs me. I don't care the time that it's going to take. I'm in to invest in these young men. And I think that's ultimately what we need. But also on the other side of that is you need to relentlessly pursue being poured into. Yeah. So don't just think you've settled into this pouring out space, because that's where burnout and all of that stuff happens. So for you, who's pouring into your life? I love you pointing to a Dave Jewett, right? There's plenty of men in our church that feel like they're out of the game, right? They're 70, 80 years old, and they would love for you to buy them breakfast. You're so successful anyways, you can spend some money on breakfast. But like, who are the men you can seek wisdom from in all of this? Who are the people that you can seek to be poured into by? Like, that's what I think is a crucial aspect to continuing this, is you don't arrive. Right. You don't all of a sudden just become the pourer out. No, you always need to be being invested into. And it's more than a podcast. It's more than coming to church on Sunday. It's scheduling the coffee, scheduling the breakfast with a brother, chasing after accountability, all that stuff. But I think that just those are the things that I think if our men did that at Church on the Move, 40 years from now, we'd be better for it.
Oh, yeah. And this is what makes me smile whenever you say all that. It's an invitation into something of great meaning and purpose. But what I love is you just listed a bunch of names. I get to do life with you, a bunch of other brothers. There are men already doing this, and it's an invitation to come and join us in this. There those of us who are not getting this right, but not getting it perfect, but are trying to walk out what you said, and it is making a massive difference. 100%. I mean, all those names you just mentioned, they have impacted my sons. I think I'm a pretty good dad, but they'll come to me and say what Ephraim told them, or Jeremy Dion told them, and those men are pouring into my own sons. And so, like, men are doing it, and they're finding great purpose and meaning in it, but we need more.
100%.
Like we need more in the church.
Yes.
And so it's an invitation to join us. Me and you, we're trying to do it. Like join us in doing this. Let's see what God could do with a brotherhood that is on fire for him. Yeah. And that seems like a good place to
100%.
to end it. And so Britton, thank you so much for doing this little bonus episode. And I could do this every week with you, man.
100%.
This is fun.
100%.
But I hope it was helpful for you guys that tuned in. And we're very thankful to have Britton here at Church on the Move. And man, we'll just see you next time we gather as a brotherhood. Love you guys.